Bradley, who has been here a number of times before. And I'm not going to try to do a full introduction on him because it's just too much for me to have. But anyway, he is a noted author. He is our commander of the Tennessee Division of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And I will, and a professor, and he writes some pretty good books too. Dr. Bradley, if you will, please, sir.
Thank you, sir. Let's be very honest. That's ex-professor as of last May, and no regrets. I've been there 36 years. And I suddenly realized there were people in some state institutions that committed murder that didn't do 36 years. So I decided I'd just give myself a parole and retire. Very quickly, let me say one thing on behalf of the division. In just a few weeks, we will arrive at the 1st of April. I am requesting the commander of each town to make sure that a letter to the editor is sent to each newspaper in the area where your camp exists, stating that your camp is observing April as Confederate History Month, and stating in that letter a couple of the things that you plan to do during that month to observe that time period. And if you have a chance to go to the local radio station and appear on every local radio station seems to have a talk program early in the morning, and they're glad to get somebody there. Try to get somebody to go and tell them what April is all about. My purpose this evening, so far as the program is concerned, is to talk to you for just a few minutes about the Escort, that's the personal bodyguards, and the staff of Nathan Bedford Forrest. I got involved in this particular research and writing project through one of those happy accidents that still occurs in the study of history. About 3 years ago, I had a group of students on a trip to Carnton at Franklin. The young man there, Heath Matthews, who at that time was their military historian at historic Carnton Plantation, said to me, "We have 2 notebooks full of the minutes that were kept by a Veterans Association formed by Nathan Bedford Forrest Bodyguard. We don't plan to do anything with them. Would you like to have them?" Well, I thought long and hard. Oh, yeah. Nearly an entire heartbeat. And I got those copies, of course, the originals, which would be in the museum. I got the copies and learned some very interesting things about that group, and then did research to reconstruct their wartime activities. So on the basis of that fortuitous accident that let me know that this group of only 100 men had their own Veterans Association and would meet for many years after the war, I was able to produce at least a small part of our continuing development of history about the war. It is the late summer of 1862. Montgomery Little. Now, did you notice the name I just gave you? Montgomery Little. Does that name Montgomery ring any bells? Mary Montgomery Forrest. This man is a cousin by marriage. His mother and Mrs. Bedford Forrest are relatives, so he's a cousin of Nathan, by marriage of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Captain Montgomery Little was sent into Bedford County, Tennessee. Now, a lot of people think the county is named for the general. It's not. The general is named for the county. When he was born, his mother couldn't come up with a good middle name, so she said, "Oh shoot, just name him Bedford." That's where he's born. So Montgomery Little is sent into Bedford County to try to recruit a group of daring young men who want to follow a daring leader. Now, of course, he has to be circumspect in what he's doing, because at that time, the first Union incursion into Middle Tennessee has just taken place. Don Carlos Buell is just the other side of the mountain over there. He is getting pretty close to Cowan on his way here to Chattanooga. He never made it, but he had started. Ormsby Mitchell, another Union general, is all the way down to Huntsville, Alabama. And Bedford County, Tennessee, Shelbyville, the county seat, is right in the middle of this Union-occupied area. So Montgomery Little has to be very careful in his recruiting activities. But he is an excellent recruiting officer. He knew just where to go to find young men. Now, in the summer of 1862, if you wanted to find young men, where would you go? Well, bless your heart, you'd go the same place you would in the summer of 2007. You'd go where the young women are. So that's exactly where he went. He went to the church socials, he went to the country dances, he went to the corn shuckings and the barn raisins, because he knew that wherever there was a group of young women and young men would be there. And he also knew, when he said to the young men, I'm recruiting for Bedford Forrest, anybody who didn't step up and sign their name, well, they weren't going to have a partner for the dance that night. So he knew just where to go. At a dance near Shelbyville, Johnston Ryle heard the call to ride with Forrest. He was not quite 18 years old. From Boonville came Nathan Boone, who would be the old man of the Escort. Nathan Boone is described by his contemporaries as being fair, fat, 40, and fierce. But at age 40, he would be the old man of this organization. J.C. Jackson was recovering from a wound he had suffered at Shiloh. He had gone back to his farm, which he called the coffee lot place. Now, in those days, if you were poor and could not afford real coffee, you got the acorns from white oak trees. Peeled them, roasted them, and ground them, and you made a brew, which at least was bitter and tasted a little bit like coffee. He had a big grove of white oak trees on his farm, so he was recuperating from a wound there. Matthew Courtney had been in the 17th Tennessee. He had been a captain. When that regiment served its one-year term of enlistment, they reorganized, and he lost his place as captain. So he went back to his home at Courtner's Mill, and from there joined Bedford Forrest Escort. Courtner's Mill, incidentally, still stands on Duck River. If you would like to go with me up there fishing one day, come on over, but you got to bring the worms. George L. Cowan was a 19-year-old Irish immigrant clerking in the family dry goods store in Shelbyville when he heard the call to go ride with Forrest. Jones Greer of Lincoln County actually lived in the little town of Belfast. Joined the Escort on the same day that George L. Cowan did. Jones Greer would stand out in the Escort. You would know him in an instant, because Mr. Greer was one of 6 black men who served in the Escort, the personal bodyguards of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Now, these are not wagon drivers. These are combat soldiers. They held rank, they drew pay, they carried weapons, and in rotation, when their turn came on the duty roster, they stood sentry duty outside the tent where Bedford Forrest slept at night. Martin Livingston Parks of Lynchburg had gone off to Virginia with Peter Turney, as did my great-great-grandfather. He had served for 1 year and then was discharged because of illness. He came home, recovered his health, and rejoined Forrest Escort. Following the same route was M.A. Enochs, also of Lynchburg. He had been wounded at Southern Pines and was sent back home to recover. When he returned to the Army in Virginia after recovering from his wound, he celebrated his 17th birthday. He was wounded in combat at age 16. He stayed with the Army of Northern Virginia, was in Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, was captured at Gettysburg, exchanged, came back home to Tennessee, and joined Bedford Forrest Personal Escort. Polk Arnold of Shelbyville joined the Escort in September of 1862, met his death in combat, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, July the 17th, 1864. Polk Arnold was another of the African Americans who served in Bedford Forrest Escort. Thomas C. Little of Lincoln County had a brother who was in the Union Army. His brother was in the 5th Tennessee Cavalry, U.S. Now, some of you might know a little bit about the 5th Tennessee. A bunch of them came from Soddy Daisy. Is anybody here from Soddy Daisy? Anything you'd care to say about Soddy Daisy?
I was born there as soon as I got old enough to run away and never went back.
Thomas Little's brother was in that unit from up there, and his brother came home on furlough. Thomas C. Little stole his brother's horse, boots, saddle, both his brother's pistols, and rode off to join the other side, went off to join Nathan Bedford Forrest. Willie Lipscomb of Shelbyville had ridden with the escort for over 2 years when he was mortally wounded at Fouch Springs near Pulaski in November of 1864. His father was a physician in Shelbyville. King got his son, brought him home. 5 days later, he died of his wounds. He's buried out in the cemetery in Shelbyville. According to his tombstone, he lately passed his 18th birthday and had served more than 2 years in the Confederate Army. So, this is a part of that group of rather daring young men who assembled in Bedford County, Tennessee in that hot summer of 1862. Now, in September, with the Union Army pulled back up into Kentucky, thanks to Braxton Bragg's assembling the army here at Chattanooga, then moving across the mountains up into Kentucky, Tennessee, North Alabama, is now vacated by Union troops. So these men now gather in Shelbyville. 104 of them go up into the courtroom. They take the oath of allegiance to the Confederacy, walk downstairs, out the south-facing door, mount their horses, ride around the square, and out the Murfreesboro Pike, headed north. They were armed with shotguns, and a few of them had pistols. But that was the best that could be done at that particular time. Now, once they reached Bedford Forrest, who at that time was near Laverne, he was just on the outskirts of Nashville, watching the Union garrison that had been left to occupy the state capital while the rest of the Union Army goes north. They would become very close friends and associates of the staff. Now, remember, the staff are the people who run the various departments. They're if you will, the military bureaucrats who take care of the necessary business of running any military organization. And as I see this became pretty much a father-son kind of relationship. Because except for Nathan Boone, who was the lieutenant for the escort, and Montgomery Little, who was its commanding officer, what you really have in the escort are a bunch of boys, middle to late teens. Yet the members of the staff are in every case successful businessmen, most of them in their late 30s up to mid-40s. It's interesting to note that Bedford Forrest had 0 plantation owners on his staff. Every single member of his staff was a businessman whose civilian occupation matched the military duty that Forrest wanted them to carry out. Forrest was a pretty shrewd judge, apparently, not only of men, but also of talent. I've often wondered if Bedford Forrest had been born 100 years later, where would he be today? My real feeling is that he would probably be the head of one of the Fortune 500 companies, because he was certainly a man who knew how to make money. He was a millionaire in his own lifetime, and a man who could judge character and talent and match the two for business purposes would certainly go far in today's world. But one of those men was Charles Anderson, who had been vice president of the Nashville-Chattanooga Railroad, a man accustomed to writing clear, concise business communications. He becomes Forrest's military secretary. He's the man who writes the orders that Bedford Forrest issues. He also composed that famous farewell address that Forrest would issue to his men at the end of the war. John P. Strange of Memphis was an attorney. He became the adjutant. What better training to be an adjutant than a man who had been educated as an attorney? C.S. Severson became the quartermaster. C.S. Severson had run an import-export business in Memphis. He was accustomed to handling and issuing merchandise, so he's put in charge of all equipment. George Rambaugh ran a very large hotel in Memphis. He becomes the commissary officer. He knows how to feed people and buy quantities of food. J.B. Cowan, Tullahoma, became the surgeon for Forrest almost as soon as Forrest got his independent command. Now, how many times was Forrest wounded during the war? Do you recall?
4 times.
You're a little shy. About 7. And every one of those wounds was treated by J.B. Cowan. But Cowan said the most dangerous time he ever had in administering medicine to Forrest came in the late summer of 1863 during the Chickamauga campaign, when Forrest got a boil on a portion of his anatomy where no horseman ever wants to have a boil. And J.B. Cowan had the lancet. He said the air positively turned blue on that occasion. Well, you know, Forrest was noted for having difficulty with the third commandment. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. He didn't seem to have any difficulty breaking the third commandment. But he was notoriously a profane individual in his language. Incidentally, J.B. Cowan was also the chief poker player of the Escort staff. Now, his father was a Presbyterian minister, so I don't know where he learned this. Except you've all heard stories about the preacher's kids, and J.B. Cowan was one. Quick illustration of that. On the West Tennessee raid, just after they started there in December '62, Forrest captured the Union garrison at Livingston, Tennessee. That was commanded by Robert Ingersoll. Everybody in 19th century America knew Robert Ingersoll. He was an agnostic. He said you could not prove to him that God existed. Well, J.B. Cowan made a believer out of him. Well, not in religion. He made a believer out of Cowan's ability to fill an inside straight. Because a week later, when Ingersoll was paroled, Cowan had to loan the man $100 to get home on him. Cowan had cleaned him out. 1887, 25 years later, Ingersoll's giving a lecture in Nashville. He saw Cowan in the audience and waved to him, and at the end of the lecture came down and wrote him a check for $100, which was darn good business. Cowan had given him $100 Confederate. Sam Donaldson and Mercer Odie were 2 teenagers who served on the staff. They had been recruited for the specific purpose of keeping Willie Forrest, 16 years old, company. Willie was his father's aide-de-camp, and his father wanted good Christian company for his son. Now, after what I just said about Forrest being notoriously profane, here's another side to his character. He did not want his son talking like that. So he got the youngest son of Samuel Donaldson Sr., who would become a Confederate brigadier, but who was noted as a leading Christian layman in the state of Tennessee. And Mercer Odie's daddy was fairly well known in religious circles. Mercer Odie's father was Episcopal bishop of the state of Tennessee. Sam Freeman would operate on Forrest's staff as the commander of his artillery until he was killed while a prisoner in the hands of the 4th U.S. Cavalry just outside Franklin on April 1863. And then, as you all know, John Morton took over that responsibility, celebrating his 21st birthday on the field at Chickamauga. So he became associated with Bedford Forrest when he was 19 years old. No wonder Forrest called him a white-faced little boy. Morton was about 5'4", and at that time weighed 98 pounds. Of course, now if you go into war riding a horse, 98 pounds is a good weight. The horse will appreciate that.
He had bad eyesight, too.
Yes, yeah, and later would serve as Secretary of State for the state of Tennessee for a long, long time. Now, in December 1862, the combatant staff the escorting staff go into combat together for the first time. They would accompany Forrest on that West Tennessee road. They would be with Forrest at Brentwood and at Thompson Station. And it's at Thompson Station, incidentally, that Montgomery Little, the commanding officer, is killed. Forrest turned to Nathan Boone and said, "You're the man, you're now in charge." And Nathan Boone did something that very few people ever did. He said to Bedford Forrest, no. Very few people told Bedford Forrest no. Nathan Boone said, General, I'm a good lieutenant, but I think I'd be a pretty sad captain. I don't think I could do that job. Forrest said, well, who's going to command the escort? He said, well, there's a better man than I am already in the escort. He should command it, but you're not going to like it when I tell you his name because he's an enlisted man. Forrest said, yeah. I said, you see this wreath on my collar? That means I can do battlefield promotions. What's his name? He said, it's John Jackson. He's a private. He said, not anymore. He's now captain in charge of my escort. And John Jackson would serve in that capacity for the rest of the war. Now, some of you are going to tell me, but I heard that so-and-so commanded the escort on such and such an occasion, and I will say probably did. Because John Jackson got shot more often than any individual I've ever heard of who lived to tell the tale. He spent a massive amount of time in the hospital recovering from wounds. So on any given day, there may have been somebody else leading the escort. But John Jackson was the officer of record. And as soon as he would get out of the hospital, he would resume command. The records of this unit are filed in the state archives under the heading of John Jackson's Cavalry Company. They would help to chase Abel Strait. They would fight in the Tullahoma campaign, the Chickamauga campaign. They would be the only organized group of troops that Forrest took with him after his big blow-up of Braxton Bragg here after Chickamauga when he was sent over to North Mississippi. And incidentally, they arrived over there at Como, Mississippi. The Union Army occupied Memphis, as you well know, but Como is just about that far outside the Memphis city limits. Forrest was literally close enough he could hear the Union bugles blow reveille in the morning. So the commissary was doing its usual job, which meant there wasn't anything much to eat. And it's getting right at Christmas, and George Cowan said, since the commissary is not furnished anything for Christmas, if you'll give me some volunteers from the escort, I'll go down here in the swamps and get us some bear. Forrest said, go ahead. So 3 days later, George Cowan and 6 men came back with 2 wagons loaded with skinned bear carcasses. Now, most of the men noticed that when Christmas dinner was served, that bear had a striking resemblance to mutton. But nobody turned it down when the cook put it on their plate. They would be with Forrest during his second raid into West Tennessee that took him all the way up to Paducah on the Ohio River. They would fight in that Mississippi campaign of 1864, Bryce's Crossroads being one of the big names from there. They would be on the raid on the Nashville and Decatur railroads, Athens, Sulphur Springs, Sulphur Creek Trestle. They would hit the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad. They'd be at Johnsonville when Forrest temporarily had his own navy sailing up down the Tennessee River. They would be the advance guard and the rear guard of Hood's movement into Tennessee. They would still be fighting in the spring of 1865, fighting their last major battle at Selma, and laying down their well-used arms at Gainesville, Alabama in May of 1865. This is the only Confederate unit I have ever found that had more men in it when it surrendered than they had when they were organized. They organized with 104. They surrendered 110. Which means that when somebody got wounded or sick and was sent to the hospital, and Forrest got somebody to fill that spot, as soon as that person was discharged from the hospital, they came back. 1 deserted. Now, about 200 people served in the escort during the entire course of the war. It was never more than about 100 to 110 at any given time. But as people would come and go, wounds, death, illness, about 200 served in all. 1 desertion, 1/2 of 1%. Do you know what the usual rate was? And even good units, a whole lot higher than that. So that tells you something about the, I suppose, spirit of enthusiasm and patriotism of this group. Now let's skip ahead to 1877. Bedford Forrest has died. He, all his life, had suffered from high blood pressure. Now, that was not diagnosed at that time, but you have read that description. I've forgotten which of the biographies it's in. I think it's Wyeth's, about how when Forrest became excited, his face would flush, as Wyeth put it, the color of a red Indian. Sounds to me like high blood pressure. And now, as a middle-aged man, the usual problems that would go along with high blood pressure. Also, from the way in which he was so totally torn up by certain kinds of food that he would eat, I suspect he had diabetes. But at any rate, he knows he's dying, and in some last-ditch attempt to hold on to whatever health he could, he came to one of the health resorts that were then prevalent in Middle Tennessee. He came to Hurricane Springs Hotel. Hurricane Springs Hotel is just outside Tullahoma. If you like to fish for rockfish and you come over to Timms Ford Lake, you put your boat in the water at Holiday Hills Marina, which used to be called Hurricane Springs Hotel. So Forrest came there, and Charles Anderson came to meet him. And immediately on meeting him, Charles Anderson was impressed by a change that had come over Bedford Forrest. He said to him, "General, you are a changed man, and I've only been with you for 5 minutes." And Forrest said, "Yes, I have become a Christian, and for whatever time I have left, I will try to live like one. But," he said, "I would like to meet the members of my escort one last time." So ads were put in the local newspapers, and on July the 27th, 1877, those who could assembled at Hurricane Springs. George L. Cowan was there, and he wrote, "The first reunion of Lieutenant General N.B. Forrest, escort staff, was held at Hurricane Springs on Friday, July the 27th, 1877. The attendance was large considering the short notice given, but many ex-Confederates of different commands, with the large number of guests at the Springs, made the crowd very large. Many of the escort and staff came mounted, and many of them were clad in gray jeans cloth, the same as they had worn while in service. The meeting was called to order by J.B. Cowan. Major Charles Anderson was made chairman. Lieutenant George L. Cowan became secretary. The following resolution was offered by George Cowan and unanimously adopted. Resolved that we now be formed into an association to be known and designated as the Association of Lieutenant General N.B. Forrest, Escort, and Staff." Now, you all are well aware that in the years after the war, the old veterans formed the UCV, the United Confederate Veterans. But we have lost sight of the fact that this was only the big overarching organization. The Army of Northern Virginia, the Army of Tennessee, Army of the Trans-Mississippi, all had veterans associations. Army Corps had associations, divisions, brigades, regiments all had associations. Chaplains had an association, surgeons had an association, and a veteran would belong to as many of these as they possibly could, because this is the way you kept in touch with your buddies. The only thing that makes this one stand out is that membership was limited to those who had been in Forrest bodyguard and their close wartime associates on the staff. So those eligible for membership were, by 1877, probably 125 or 150 maximum. So this would be a very small organization. General Forrest then spoke. "Ladies, gentlemen, and comrades, it's useless for me to speak after what all the others have said. You all know my physical condition. I am unable to speak. I simply desire to return my sincere thanks to my escort. No one can express the feelings which have passed through my breast today. I love the members of my escort. I love the memories. I feel grateful that I have been spared to meet so many of them today after an absence of 12 years. When I left them, I was a strong, hardy, and robust man, but I am different now. I may not live long, but I hope we all meet in heaven." That was the last time Forrest would see those men. On October the 20th, 1877, at the home of one of his sons in Memphis, Bedford Forrest died. Now, for reasons unknown, the association did not meet again until 1883, when they met at Pilot Springs, another of those health resorts which today is also on the banks of Thames Ford Lake, just over across the mountain here. From that time on, they met regularly. They would meet at Tullahoma, Fayetteville, Petersburg, Boonville. They met 3 times in Nashville. They met at John Morton's home called Vine Hill. Now, if you go to Nashville, you've been to Vine Hill, more than likely. Today it's the fairgrounds. That was John Morton's farm. They met at Belle Meade. Now, if you've been to that big home that belonged to the Harding family in Nashville, the Escort met there, and the carriage house at Belle Meade. And they met once at the Ryman Auditorium. Twice they met in Memphis, 1901 and 1905. Those dates were significant to them. In 1901, they laid the cornerstone for the Forrest Monument. And in 1905, they dedicated the monument. Incidentally, the minutes of that 1905 meeting are quite interesting. It says, the ladies of the United Daughters of the Confederacy have graciously provided carriages so that we may ride in comfort to the dedication. But, and these words are underlined, we will go mounted. It might take a block and tackle to get them old boys up in the saddle and 3 strong men to get them back down. But one last time, they were going to ride with Forrest. There was one meeting that I would very much like to have attended. They met at Windermere, the home of George L. Cowan. When George Cowan was 42 years old, he met a young woman who was 40 years old. Neither of them had ever been married. They fell in love and got married. Now remember, that was pretty old at that time. This young woman's name was Hattie McGowan. At age 16, she had watched the Battle of Franklin from her home, Carnton Plantation, and she had helped her mother bury those 1,600 Confederate soldiers that still lie at that place today. George Cowan became the McGowan's son-in-law. Have you read The Widow of the South? I hope not. I hope you haven't wasted your time. It was George L. Cowan who conducted that Mrs. McGowan's funeral. And she was nothing like the woman depicted in that book of fiction. She was known as the Good Samaritan of Williamson County because nobody ever went lacking if she knew they had anything they needed. She was a staunch member of the Presbyterian Church there. At any rate, the minutes say we met in the grove of oak trees overlooking the cemetery, and we built a bonfire and sat up all night reminiscing. Now, as the embers of that fire die down, and as the level in that bottle goes a little lower, well, they didn't have Tylenol, you know. You've got to give old men a little slack here. Don't you know there was tales told around that campfire that night? Of all the places for them to have told their story. They enjoyed these reunions because they rekindled their friendships and reawakened memories, but every year there was also an occasion of sadness because every year the page in the minutes that says we note with regret the passing of our beloved comrade, that page has more names on it. The number of those attending is a little smaller and a little smaller, and they all are showing passage of time. In 1909, they met for the last time. And appropriately enough, they met in Shelbyville, the place where they had started. There was soul-stirring song and speech galore for the next 2 hours. Elder T.C. Little of Fayetteville held his audience spellbound as he told of running away from home, a mere boy, to join the Escort. We have never heard the brilliant genius of Nathan Bedford Forrest more splendidly portrayed and ably illustrated than on this occasion. On the morning of the next day, a business meeting was conducted and resolutions were adopted in memory of those who had died during the last year. John Morton read a paper, and a formal oration by the Reverend John B. Irwin closed the meeting. A dinner was then served in the courthouse, and the meeting concluded with the singing of old war songs. Now, see the picture. See the picture. 1862. 104 healthy, enthusiastic young men take the oath of allegiance to the Confederacy, walk down the steps, out the south-facing door, mount their horses, ride around the courthouse square, and out to Murfreesboro Pike. 47 years later, six gray-bearded old men totter out the door and are helped onto their horses so they can ride around the square and out to Murfreesboro Pike. They're all gone now. T.C. Lowell was the last man standing. He died in 1936. They're all gone now. They will not soon be forgotten. Now, you've been a very nice group, as you always are. So if you had a quick question, I would be delighted to give you an answer, and if I don't know, I'll make up something. Yes, sir.
Mike, I wanted to ask you, in that McGee's Diary, 72nd, Indiana, the Wilders people,
Yeah.
just outside of Selma, when they made that last stand at the crossroads, and he said they had that company that made that mistake of making a 4-abreast mounted charge down that road. That was Forrest Escort, wasn't it, that rode down either side of them and shot them to pieces?
Yes, right. Yeah.
He said that was the biggest mistake they ever made. They used a bunch of infantrymen, sabers, some fool decided to make a saber charge,
Yeah.
and they just ate them up. With
Yeah, they just divided and got on the side of the road and let them ride right down the middle. Yeah. Incidentally, Forrest Escort was carrying Spencers.
Did they actually, were they?
They had Spencers, so they not only had repeating rifles, each man had 2 6 guns.
Well, they were big on a lot of pistols.
Yes. So they were an enormous amount of firepower. There's one other Selma story. As Nathan Boone, who has just been whacked over the head with a saber and has his head wrapped up in a towel, is leading the escort through the darkness, trying to regroup with whatever was left after Selma. He heard a scream from a house nearby. He led the escort up there, and the 4th U.S. Cavalry had bivouacked there and was in the act of committing rape. The last attack the escort made was on the 4th U.S. Cavalry, the same ones that had killed Sam Freeman. The only report filed says no prisoners were taken.
I'd like,
Let me get this question.
What weapons did the general carry?
He invariably carried a pistol, usually 2, and was later convinced, well, actually during that first West Tennessee raid, was convinced to carry a saber, which he was told at the time was simply a symbol of authority, but he came to kind of like it. Particularly being left-handed, because he blindsided people with it. They were looking over here and he was coming here. But it's also a matter of record that he frequently went into hand-to-hand combat positions with a pistol and would parry a saber blow with his pistol, which is one reason he went through so many pistols.
yeah, I would like to say my grandmother was born in 1861 over in War Trace, Tennessee.
Oh, yes.
Her father was a captain in the Confederate Army. And in the battle around Murfreesboro, he was there, and my grandmother, of course, she didn't remember it. But I guess it was 1862, 1863, she was just a baby. And her mother took her in a buggy, flying white flag, and they let them go through the line over to Confederate side and to visit her father. Of course, she didn't remember that. But she also told stories about the Yankees coming to their house. and taken about everything they had. And she remembers one of the Yankee soldiers getting her father's hat. He had a big old hat, and walking out. And she was bitter about that. She said they took everything they had to eat, except they left them an old crumpled horn cow, because they had a bunch of kids, so they could
Milk cow.
milk cow. But she remembered that, and she never forgot it, and she just didn't have much use for northern people after that. She said, now, I'd be nice to them, but said I wouldn't invite any of them to my house to eat. Until the day she died in about 1946, I guess.
Which, you know, it's amazing how the past is still so close behind us. Well, Commander, thank you for your invitation.
I don't mention this, I've got a picture of my great-grandfather from Bedford County, and family, according to the family, he was one of the bodyguards. Wiseman,
Wiseman, oh yeah.
You came to our cemetery a few years
Yes, I
ago.
did, yes.
That's Elisha Wiseman.
Yes.
And Hilltop, we know it was there somewhere in Bedford County, and that's where they assembled, you know.
Doctor, please tell us about your book that I've already bought one of. This man not only tells a nice story, he really writes a tremendous book.
How much did you give him, Doctor?
I was about to say, remind me to give you your cut here. Well, it's like, doggone, you know, I just opened the tailgate on the truck and there they were. So, this is the account of the Escort and staff during the war and their years in their Veterans Association as well.
Dr. Bradley, you answered a question for me with your Blood and Fire book. I had run across my friend Calvin Crixie.
Oh, yeah.
And over all my studies over in Pelham, in the north end, actually, it's Franklin County, part of Grundy
That's
County.
crazy.
And he operated up in there, and everybody I ever talked to couldn't tell you about a Civil War soldier. They'd tell you about the Brixie bunch.
Yep.
We got to researching, about 2/3 of his ancestors were part of his bunch. But somebody needs to do a study on him. But your book answered what that school, got that affidavit of that school picture that says those Confederate guys finally came by and got Cal.
Last seen, he was going down the road, a prisoner.
Yeah, that was the end of Cal.
That was in the Cal.